Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight at the end of the first full day of our Global Democracy Conference. I know you have been paying attention for a long day, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to introduce you to my colleague, Dave Campbell, in the Department of Political Science, who is the chair of the director of the newly created Democracy Initiative at the University of Notre Dame. Dave, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Anibal, and thank you to, first of all those who have been involved in organizing this conference, and to all of those who have come from far and near to be a part of this, this exciting event. As Anibal said, I direct what is known at Notre Dame as the Democracy Initiative, and you may have heard references to this over the course of the day. It does raise the question, what does it mean to say we have a democracy initiative? And if one of you knows the answer, you could tell me later. I would like to know that. But as near as I can figure out, my job, and this is going to sound like I'm just pandering to my colleagues at the Kellogg Institute, but it really is true, that my job as the director of this university-wide effort to promote scholarship and education and convenings on the subject of democracy is to take the secret sauce that the Kellogg Institute has and apply it across the university. The Kellogg really has been a leader, certainly at the university, but I think we can agree across academia around the world in promoting not just scholarship on democracy, but the very promotion of democracy as a form of government and all that comes along with it. And so it's humbling to be here with such an illustrious group. But let me just take just one moment or two and talk a little bit about what it means to say that we have this democracy initiative. The larger context is that the university has identified a small number of themes that it will be focusing on over the next decade. These are all themes in areas where Notre Dame feels that it already has some strength and therefore can continue to build. They include the study of poverty, the study of ethics, and of course the study of democracy. And just so we're clear about this, we are against poverty, we are for ethics, and, wait for it, we are also for democracy. It's a bold statement, I know, but anyway. Again, I don't want to belabor the point here and hold people up from the conversations that they're having, but I'll just briefly say that as part of this initiative, we hope to establish Notre Dame as not just a national, but a global leader in the study of, the promotion of, the advocacy for democracy. And as we are all aware, democracy is fragile. It is certainly fragile around the world, and as we've been increasingly reminded over the last few years, including here in the United States. And so one of the great hopes that I have in directing this initiative is to put those of us like myself who study the United States primarily in conversation with those who study the rest of the world, because there was once a time when those who studied American politics actually gave a lot of thought to what it means to preserve a democracy. If you go back and read the political science literature from the 1950s and 60s, that was a major theme. And then it just disappeared from the American politics literature. As my colleague Christina Wolbrecht noted on a panel earlier today, we, within the American politics crowd, would just assume that the United States would always be a liberal democracy. How could it not be? That is what we are. And as we are seeing, we should not take that for granted. And as people in my own area of study have scrambled to try to understand what is happening in this country, we have, of course, benefited from the scholarship of those who've studied the rest of the world. So at the very least, I hope that we at Notre Dame can be a model to the rest of academia to bring those people studying different parts of the world together, because I don't think it'll come as any secret to this crowd that, and again, I'm somebody who studies American politics, sometimes the Americanists can be kind of their own club. And that has been to our detriment. So let me just conclude by saying again how grateful I am for the Kellogg Institute and the good work that they do. And I hope over the next few years that you all will see the good work that is being done here at Notre Dame with our faculty, with our students, as we bring practitioners and policymakers and thought leaders to campus to try to showcase what we as an institution can do on the important subject of democracy. And so if nothing else, I hope you'll spread the good word about the work that we are doing here. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that welcome, Professor Campbell. So my name is Bupe Lohano Kabaye, and I am a recent graduate of the University of Notre Dame as of 2 days ago. So thank you. Thank you. So during my time here, I studied political science and global affairs, and the Kellogg Institute has been a home for me for the past 4 years. I have done an international development studies concentration, and I have also been part of the International Scholars Program with my advisor being Professor Jamie Blake. So, yeah. Yeah, and I wrote a senior thesis on women's representation in the Zambian National Assembly, which was amazing and probably one of the highlights of my undergraduate experience. So that's me, but I'm here to introduce a very distinguished guests today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Helena Carreiras. She is a distinguished professor at the University Institute of Lisbon, specializing in public policy, psychology, and research methods. Her impressive career includes her recent tenure as the Minister of National Defense of Portugal, a role she held until last April. And during her tenure, she played pivotal roles such as the pivotal role in the NATO response to the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And she has made history as the first woman to hold the position of Minister of Defense in Portugal between 2022 and 2024. And I think just that needs an applaud. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And previously, she was the first woman to serve as director of National Defense Institute from 2019 to 2022. So that's a lot of firsts and very good firsts. So we're very lucky to have you here today. And she holds a PhD in social and political sciences from the European University Institute in Florence, and she serves as the director of School of Sociology and Public Policy at the University Institute of Lisbon, and that was from 2016 up until 2019. And she was president of the European Research Group on Military and Society in 2017 to 2019. In 2014, she was a visiting professor in the Department of Government at Georgetown University, and her research interests are diverse and include public security and defense policy, civil-military relations, gender and society, and qualitative research methodology. Yeah, so she's the author of seminal work, Gender and the Military, Women in the Armed Forces of Western Democracies. I think you guys should get the book and read it. It's really good. Yeah, and she has edited and co-edited several influential volumes, so it's my pleasure to really introduce her to us. So please help me in welcoming her to the stage to give the keynote. Thank you.
Well, good night, everybody. Thank you so much. It is really a great pleasure for me to be here. They say ex-ministers get depressed when they finish their terms, at office, but because they don't get phone calls. Nobody calls them anymore. I was lucky enough that I was not called. It was an email, but I was invited to this conference, and I could not imagine a better way for me to re-socialize with academia than a conference where we're discussing democracy, because I really do think this is something we all have to do now more than ever, study, protect, and promote democracy. So this is something I want to do. Maybe I will take a look at your democracy initiative and maybe come over again sometime to continue my studies. Well, we'll see. If I don't bore you too much today, maybe you will welcome me again. The other reason why it is so important to be here is because in 2024, Portugal celebrates 50 years of democracy, 50 years of the Carnation Revolution, the 25th of April. We celebrated while at the same time witnessing, and for the first time to a some extent, the growth of undemocratic forces and the rise of tensions over the very basic principles of democracy. We have just, you probably know because you were attentive scholars of democracy, and the Portuguese case has always been kind of special. We had, for the first time, an extreme right group party in parliament. They have 50 out of 230 seats in parliament. Last week only, just to give you an idea, they proposed to sue the president of the republic for high treason due to his comments on restitution regarding our ex-colonies in Africa. And last week also we had a group of a nationalist, racist group breaking into the home of immigrants in Oporto and beating them. This is not common in Portugal. Well, last week also we had 50 personalities, I think there are now 100, signing a manifest asking for deep reform in our justice system. We had many problems, recent problems. So all this is a sign that we went to the streets in the biggest rally ever celebrating the 50 years of the revolution of democracy. And I think it was so big because we all realized that once again, as you all mentioned during this day conference, that there's some urgency to look at what's the problem with democracy and find answers to how can we protect and promote democracy. It cannot be taken for granted, as it was just said. So it must be a whole of society affair. And I think this is more and more the feeling also in Portugal, a country where politics was so boring. My supervisor said that the best sign of consolidation of democracy was the level of boredom. And Portugal was boring all the time. He has been repeating this, but right now, unfortunately, it's not boring any longer. It has, unfortunately, been very, very problematic. So this led me to the question that it might be interesting to look at, in my area of study, the military and civil-military relations, to ask the question that many scholars of civil-military relations have been asking, but ask it again, and there's a momentum. How can the military, as a fundamental state institution, help protect and promote democracy? in our societies. So might sound a bit weird, a lot of you studying contexts where the military did not bring democracy, but are usually the actors of the opposite kind of political movements, that I'm so focused. I think that it is relevant not only because military democracy is under stress, but because the military are getting more and more relevant in the geopolitical scenario due to what's happening in Ukraine and all the changes that are taking place. So what lessons can we learn from the Portuguese example, from the past, but also from current trends? So I'm one of the optimistic, I tell you. I think we need to understand that many narratives do have the self-fulfilling prophecy effect. And I think it's very important not only to focus on the problems, the difficulties, and as a politician, I really saw this happening all the time, that there's a great focus on the chaos that is being generated, the uncertainty that is being generated purposefully. And so there's also the need to look at the good lessons, the things that work, see how we can turn this into elements that will help us transform fear into trust. Because this is the biggest challenge, because democracy needs trust and legitimacy. And I think this is really very, very important. It's the most important thing. So the Portuguese case, why do I bring it? Well, some have argued that there was a rather unusual success. The military were the ones who brought democracy to the country. They kept power for over a decade, and then they left it. And progressively, we saw the subordination of the military to civilian rule, and a whole institutional architecture was developed that ensures not only this civilian democratic control, but also the conditions that make me think that we still have a very healthy pattern of civil-military relations. I hope I'm not wrong, because I can see that my Brazilian friends also thought that the military in Brazil were already developing a democratic culture, were out of power, not seeking power, but then some circumstances sometimes change things. So I would not like to predict anything except at the end of the game. This was the way how a Portuguese coach, football coach said, I will not make any predictions, only at the end of the game. But it's difficult to predict the future, I think it was said this morning. But anyway, I think there are lessons to be learned. And the military were key actors, and they are still important institutional actors. And they have a role in helping us protect and promote democracy. Let me start with a story. So they unlike other European countries, democracy did not come after a pact between elites. It was the direct result of a non-hierarchical military coup that overthrew a 48 years long dictatorship and a 13-year-long colonial war. So this coup generated the Carnation Revolution, and its aftermath, the most beautiful revolution of the 20th century, in fact, and initiated the third wave of democratization in the world, as you all know. My preferred story is this one. Maybe some of you heard about it. In the early hours of the day, the 25th of April, 74, there was a column, a military column coming from the city of Santarém to Lisbon. These were the captains This was the captains that initiated and implemented the plan to overthrow the Estado Novo regime, the authoritarian regime. They were coming to perform a military coup. When they were crossing the city, very early in the morning, at some point there was a sudden halt. The column stopped abruptly. And the captain, Salgueiro Maia, who was the head of this, he was in the first car. He asked the driver, "Why did you stop?" And he said, "There's a red light." This is true. I tell you, first there was the idea that maybe this was a story that somebody was telling, and I confirmed because we have been having meetings with all the captains, celebrating with the April captains, and I asked the chief captain, and he told me, yes, it's true, and then there were interviews with the guy, with the driver himself. And Salgueiro Maia reports this. So it is both a literal and the perfect metaphor for Portuguese society and politics, and to explain the state of civil-military relations in my country, I hopefully until now and to the future. It has to do, as far as I can interpret this, with a high consent to institutional norms. This guy comes to do a revolution, and he stops at the red light. Of course, then they moved on, and then eventually they did what they came to do without blood. Only 4 or 5 people died later on, but this was a very peaceful revolution. But I think this kind of respect by norms, we saw it in the protests also when we had the sovereign debt crisis. Everybody was asking, why are the Portuguese protesting in such a calm or peaceful way, or at least not so violent as in Greece or Spain or other countries? And some, of course, pointed to this characteristic of a certain respect for institutions and the presence of institutions themselves. The trade unions were in the streets. They were controlling, and there was a kind of agreement between trade unions and the police that to maintain order and avoiding protests to be too violent. But I always remember when I tell this that my husband came from Argentina. He lives in Portugal for 20 years. But he's always surprised at how quiet we seem to be, because not always, and we'll see what the present circumstances produce. But he said that he could not understand what he saw. There was, during one of these protests, in front of the parliament, a lot of people were being a bit violent, throwing stones to the police, imagine. And for hours, at a certain point, the police started to move. And there was a few people got a bit hurt, and there was this old lady being interviewed by a radio, and she said, the journalist asked, "Ma'am, are you hurt? What do you think about this? This is really bad, isn't it?" "Oh, well, it happened. I was here. They shouldn't really be throwing stones to the police." So there should be this respect. And this story for him is kind of paradigmatic. But anyway, what I believe is that there are two things to this pattern. So kind of respect for institutions and norms, together with a very flexible interpretation of enactment of those norms, of the implementation of those norms. So that's why some colleagues who study corruption noted that there is very little systemic corruption. Bribes are not commonly accepted. but there is a lot of flexibility when it comes to pull strings or exert some influence. So we can see this. We have this duality that I think is also seen for the good and the bad in other areas. So, transition and consolidation of democracy in Portugal. The military were key actors. They kept power, and then they left. Why and how? Quickly, before going to a few examples I want to give you of my own practice as a minister, where I had the opportunity to test how my knowledge of civil-military relations fits a reality. So they were central actors, as in all political transitions in Portugal during the 20th century. In fact, they were, the reasons for this intervention were mainly internal, domestic politics, not that the international factors did not have a weight there, but these were mainly reasons that had to do with the war, the colonial war. It was lost in a way. Everybody thought, and the military thought, that there was no political solution to the war. In Guinea-Bissau, it was already a big problem, and the military definitely didn't want to be the scapegoats of the regime, as they had been in India some years before. And so, on the one hand, the war, we were losing the war. There was no way of winning militarily the war, and there were corporative requests. The lack of personnel, of officers, obliged, well, the government to contract personnel, new officers, milicianos we call them, that were having only 1 year instead of 4 years of training in military schools. And this was a threat to their professional trajectories. So this was the main motives for the movement. And we had, I won't stay there, but a few years of transition that were really complicated from the point of view of the contradictions of the actor that emerged from this movement, of the captain movement, the Movimento das Forças Armadas, the movement of the armed forces, turmoil, really complicated years where the military participated intensely in politics, but then in '76 there was a new constitution, there were elections, and while the military kept power until '82, a new institutional architecture was developed that accounts for the type of integrated civil-military relations we have. And this was what we now call the semi-presidentialism, an original system of sharing power and competences between the three organs: the President of the Republic, the government, and the Parliament. And this institutional format and architecture explain how it's checks and balances in a way, but it's the balancing of power that assured the subordination of the military to the civilian authorities. Also because the President of the Republic kept huge powers, and he was a military until 1986. So he was the head of the Council of the Revolution, a very important organ that had constitutional revision powers over the other organs. But eventually, this architecture made it possible to balance power in a way that the military accepted to leave the political scene. And so we have developed this integrated pattern of civil-military relations that at the institutional level included the existence of this dual trust structure, let us say, but something like also the Council of National Defense. It still exists. It's a council where the president and government officials, the presidents of the autonomic regions, members of parliament, get together to discuss. So it's a forum for what in different other instances we develop as a comprehensive approach. And it is about this, this approach that I want to talk. I don't want to take too long to be able to answer your questions and hear your comments. But I believe that there are 3 or 4 lines through which then we manage to keep and develop this integrated approach of civil-military relations that really prevents the military from intervening. Of course, it's not only about controlling the military, it's also ensuring effectiveness. Thomas Bruno and other colleagues have talked about this. The quality of civil-military relations is not only about having the military subordinated to political power. It's about the governance of the armed forces. It's about the social contract. It's about effectiveness of the missions. And in Portugal, beyond the semi-presidentialism, this very specific institutional architecture, there was a reorientation of military missions to international missions, a more expeditionary mindset and practice developed that gave the military, allowed them to keep the professionalism that at the same time enables the autonomy that the institution needs to perform and to keep their identity. So my experience as a minister confirmed a lot the existence of both these elements. The presence of the institutions and the flexible appropriation in actual practice that we come to call, among other things, the comprehensive approach. And it's the nature of the civil-military entanglements that my examples focus on that kind of reveals this. At the political strategic level, one example from this council, when I got there, the Council of National Defense, called by the president, was considered. It does exist, and existing is important because it's a forum, as I told you, for all these entities to meet and talk about, the missions of the armed forces. It's compulsory that the council is called every time there are decisions about missions abroad or important equipment laws like the national programming law, etc. But the idea was that it was just a kind of a bureaucratic, formal thing. And I decided that it shouldn't be. We should use this forum where there's dialogue, where these people listen to each other. Ministries of finance, economics, of other areas only hear about defense in this council. You cannot imagine how, I could not imagine how not knowledgeable are different ministers about the other areas. It's governing, it's really complicated also because this quest for resources is on the basis of people who don't know each other. So this council was important. And I decided that topics such as recruitment and retention and big problems the armed forces were facing, and there are a problem for the governance of the armed forces, that one important variable for the quality of civil-military relations should be addressed there. And they were very surprised. The president said, okay, let's do that. And it became practice during my term that different issues, other issues, would be called to the council, like the war in Ukraine. So we were all talking about the war, the choices, the decisions about what to do regarding Ukraine. But so this is something that allowed a kind of civil military entanglement that I think it's useful. It strengthens democracy. And it's the basis, if you use it with the necessary flexibility and can profit from that forum, to have a stronger democracy, because people will make decisions in a more integrated and on the basis of dialogue that does not exist if you don't have this institutional framework. At the organizational level, one or two examples. The integration of military schools in the public university system. They decided they should go for this Bologna process of reform. So they are complying to all the same rules as civilian universities, which is difficult because there are so many specificities to the military, but they're doing that. That is providing, again, a comprehensive approach. People talk. Civilian and military have to talk, have to be together, have to work together to comply to the criteria of research and publications and projects and critical mass, etc. Research and innovation, also because resources are scarce. The military are innovating, but doing it together with universities and companies. We have one going on now in April, May, I think, one of the biggest exercises in the world of robotics, led by the Portuguese Navy, but with 25 other navies in the world, where all these companies, it's robotics, so it's about UAVs, unmanned maritime vehicles. It's the biggest, it's something really big where you can see all the companies, some of them were startups. One of them is one of the biggest now because of the war in Ukraine. Drones have become so popular. But they are doing it together, developing technology. Most of the time is dual technology. They are bringing in also universities. I said that. So it's another example of how we can promote these encounters. And missions, of course, I told you, reorientation to missions. And they have been successful in international missions and domestic missions. There are, of course, many problems, and we have the chaos engineers producing all kinds of appreciations that we do have problems of recruitment, of retention, problems regarding equipment. We really need to have more modern equipment if we want to remain interoperable with NATO, etc. So big problems there. But the missions, international missions in particular, have been a source of legitimacy for the armed forces to build trust. People trust the armed forces because they are effective. And that has been recognized at all three levels: political, strategic, organizational, and interpersonal. I tell you, I've been there. I've been in the Central African Republic. I've been in Romania. I've been myself before as a researcher in Kosovo with the military. And I saw them acting. It's always that idea of respecting institutions and the rules, but it's not by the book. There is this way of interacting with other people that, well, the Portuguese, maybe the Brazilian, the Spanish, others do like to think it's very special. That is this particular ability to communicate, to talk to others, to recognize the others, to produce trust. But they do. They really do. I asked the president of the Central African Republic that was telling us, me and the prime minister, we love the Portuguese. Portugal has a quick reaction force, which is the pillar of the UN mission in Central African Republic. You've been there. No, who said? Well, somebody was it Central African Republic. And they are important. There were problems with the French. Yeah, this was the comment. The French left abruptly. The Portuguese stayed, and they were telling us, we love them. And I thought, why do you love the Portuguese? Why is that? And I thought the answer would be, like most of the times, because the Portuguese do communicate, do interact well. They respect, they help, they are supportive, they are not arrogant, they are not, and no, the answer was they are effective, they protect the population. So it's being professional, but at the same time displaying what a colleague of mine called a ground floor cosmopolitanism. That's this ability to connect, to look at the other and understand that from that connection and from respect, we will have a good result. Without that, any mission will not succeed. There are so many examples in Africa where missions failed because we could not, at all levels, political, strategic, organizational, and interpersonal, display this kind of ground floor cosmopolitanism. But anyway, these missions have been really important, as well as the domestic missions. I won't tell you more, but if you want, we can go into that. This is a big topic in civil-military relations. To what extent should the armed forces have internal roles? They are not supposed to. They are not trained for police missions. They are not supposed to. And in Portugal, the same. The constitution clearly states that the military should not get involved into domestic roles. Except that, like in other countries, the military have been doing it. And have been doing it because complex emergencies require cooperation, again, but without the perverse effects that we have witnessed in many countries during the pandemic, for instance, that when the military really had behaviors that were not supposed to, violence and militarization, that did not happen in Portugal. There was a respect for the constitutional norm that the military only act supplementary to the police forces. And they did it, and they respected this, but amplified their work in many different areas. So they had a lot of roles, and especially the coordination of the vaccination plan, and it was a big success. There was the respect for the norms, one or two incidents, the good cooperation with other forces, which happens during wildfires, response to floods and earthquakes in our islands. They have been doing that, and people trust the armed forces for that, because they do it within the limits of what are the rules of the game. And I believe these good examples should be cherished, and we should understand that there are conditions, of course, that should be in place to avoid that the military will overcome and these red lines. But these are things that are effective. and they are producing good results. Finally, gender integration in the armed forces. In Portugal, formal integration has been accomplished in 2008. No more restrictions. Every law is a good law from the point of view of gender integration. The Women, Peace and Security agenda has been implemented in a very broad way. All services have in place instruments, policies that, from the formal point of view, will ensure that women will come and that gender integration proceeds. Of course, we all know that we don't need only formal policy. We don't need only numbers. Women need to be at the table, because how do they say? If you're not at the table, you are in the menu. And we know that formal integration does not ensure social integration, that we need policy instruments to ensure that this correspondence exists. And we learned from our very comprehensive process, again, of implementation of Resolution 1325 and all the gender regime that followed from that resolution, that involving all stakeholders in drawing the plans and implementing and evaluating the plans is fundamental. And this is one of the reasons why it worked. Of course, with all the challenges. We need to go beyond formal integration, but that is a necessary condition. We cannot proceed if you're not there, without a politics of presence. So having them there, having norms changed to accept everybody and profit from the talent of all kinds of people, of diversity. So I think that is in place. We just should not forget that we also have to fight the narratives. It's not only policies to promote integration, to prevent problems that will have women leaving. It's not only about training. It's not only about evaluating programs in a non-bureaucratic, technocratic way, but trying to get evaluations of impact of our policies. We were just discussing this at this conference. There's a difference between the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact, and these are very different things. So it's not enough to have 1 hour training during 1 year and make a check on the evaluation form. We gotta go. We know all that. We learned all that. We gotta do it still, because the statistics are there to show that there is still inequality. Gender explains the structure of inequality in the armed forces. And while that happens, we still have to develop policies, monitor policies. Prejudice is there. Unconscious bias is there. When I got my nomination, there was this guy saying, civilian analyst, journalist as well, he said on TV, well, I don't understand this nomination because, you know, he said this, literally, I always use it, I have the video. A woman, at this point, there is a war in Ukraine, and this is going to get worse. I don't know if a woman, well, I didn't see her curriculum. I know she studied the military. She has a lot of work there, but will she have the precise conscience of the crisis that we live in? She is a woman. Can she understand the type of crisis, of problem we're facing? This was, so just a joke to tell you that there is still, I would say, much more unconscious bias sometimes than explicit and blatant sexism. But anyway, I think we did see with the gender integration also the importance of bringing all these people together. A lot of gender advisors, civilian and military. So I will just try to stop there. Maybe you have questions on this, because I've been talking for a long time. It's late and it's been a long day. But just to say this, when you have an institution that is trusted, there is recognized, and there is legitimation, you got to protect that. You got to use that. You got to use the specific characteristics of that institution to advance our democratic objectives. The gender issue is something, and gender integration, that is a very good example of how some aspects of the hierarchy and discipline, these fundamental pillars of the military institution, are instrumental and important to accomplish integration more than in other organizations, because you have leadership that is committed because there is obedience and there are norms, and once you meet the other, that's when prejudice disappears, or potentially disappears. And in the armed forces, like in other organizations, we can profit from this type of characteristics, that the leadership is important, that the leaders are trained to advance some processes that have revealed themselves very difficult in other areas, in other organizations. So this is my 1 cent to the debate on how to use the institutions we have, understand the conditions under which these institutions can perform in ways that help us protect and promote democracy. Thank you very much.
Would you like to take some questions?
Yes, if you're not too bored, if you want to have me for some more minutes.
So we have time for some questions. I can pass the microphone. Jennifer.
You have another one there?
Oh,
There are
thanks. Okay. Thank you so much for those remarks. It sounds like we need a really good sociological and anthropological study of Portuguese social and cultural norms, and to learn how to export them. But I want to know, what is your explanation? Maybe it has to do with that or something else. What is your view about why Portugal avoided for so long the kind of populist or radical right rise, but is now experiencing it? I don't know if you consider it populist or just far right, radical right, that's arising now. What is your explanation for both avoiding it and now its arrival?
You know, people are dissatisfied with democracy, with the performance of democracy. Maybe they still keep trust in the system, and surveys and survey data show that. But in Portugal, they are not trusting the politicians, but this is a general trend. Well, I think that for a long time we had still strong institutions, the trade unions and others, that helped contain, the protest. Also, we did have identity agendas very clearly. Our protest agendas were traditional, social, economic complaints. I think this has to do with a not very strong civil society as well. So the most fracturing, I would say, topics, the most divisive topics were not there, but they came because then you have the international arena as well, and I believe that worked. we know that the people from Chega have been learning in other countries and from other sources how to do their campaigns online. And I was listening to you, thinking how fascinating this is, because this is something we need to study in Portugal. Why did Chega, this extreme populist party, get to gain so much space and power? But there's a variety of reasons. I do think we need to study that, and the behavior of other parties, and especially the narratives regarding the economy were also contributing. So it's a very, very good question. I have not specialized, but I've just seen that there is a lot of unsatisfaction, and people, and above all, there is fear. Uncertainty provokes fear, and when people are afraid, they look for certainty, for people who come with this type of narrative. And so it's very easy to have this, and no answers or no alternatives that they can see valid.
I just want to remind the audience online that they can submit questions if they would like, using the box at the bottom of their screen.
Thank you. Alejandro González, PhD student. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful. I would like to go back to the Carnation Revolution. I find that episode in your history very inspiring, and we also had the opportunity to watch the movie Capitanes de Abril with Professor Ana Fauri. So you were providing like several examples of civil-military relations during times of peace. But I would like to bring this topic to the case of Latin America, where we have this wave of authoritarian regimes growing in several points of the continent. And I was thinking, while you were speaking about these examples of the case of Venezuela and Nicaragua, where the authoritarian regimes are really powerful because the military plays a bigger role, not only in human rights violations, organized crime, and in this corruption network across the country. So I would like to hear your thoughts on which lessons we can learn from the Carnation Revolution in the cases of dictatorships in Latin America, where the military plays a bigger role, strengthening these authoritarian regimes, and which advice do you have for us in that region on how to avoid that, especially in the case of Mexico also, when we have seen like a growing trend in which the military is taking over like different spaces of the government. How can we avoid this participation or this role of the military undermining democracy instead of strengthening democratic institutions?
That is a very difficult question. I don't know if I can answer that, but I would say that in Portugal, I can see that because of course there are historical, contextual factors of various kinds that impact the different cases in Latin America. In Portugal, it was important that the military had their space of professional autonomy. Well, Huntington talking about objective control of the military. They had a long experience during the colonial war to exercise their professionality. And then the international missions and the new domestic missions being so recognized and legitimized provide that space. That is important for the military to avoid, frustrations or needs to have other type of interventions. But of course, this can be the one reason. In Portugal, it was a whole configuration of variables: the institutional semi-presidential system, the purpose the military found in all these new missions. And the fact that politics, our insertion in the European Union and NATO also, of course, explains the type of civil-military relations we had. Our participation in international missions is in the framework of this organization. So without European Union, which really coincided with the military leaving power in the mid-80s, we wouldn't have probably gotten to this pattern of civil-military relations. So this is a very strong aspect of the international alliances, NATO for sure, the European Union, and of course the UN, but that explains, I think, this result. So it's, I don't know if it's something that can be emulated, but there are some aspects of civil-military entanglements that I believe can be pursued. They are concrete things. They are things we can try to do to avoid isolation of this, the military, and make sure that the social contract is kept strong.
Thank you. I think it's fascinating how you explain not just historically speaking, but also to the nature and the identity of a group that for us in Latin America is a symbol. It's a little bit of what Alejandro was saying about Venezuela, Nicaragua, even Cuba. The military in our countries have shown that they don't believe in democracy. They are more to the mold of, Praetorian style, right? Because of our caudillo aspiration. But I wonder, as a Venezuelan, I have the best opinion of Portugal because our Portuguese community in our country has always been one of us. And it hurts, that many of them have left Venezuela, but many of them remain in Venezuela because they love our country. And it's scary to think that Portugal is going to have a similar experience than Spain is having right now. It's worrisome. But again, I think of what you just said about how back then when the Carnation Revolution, they thought, whatever the reason, they thought it was time for a change. Our military in Venezuela, in Cuba, Nicaragua, they don't think it's time other than just to find ways to stay in power. What does it need for, maybe we don't have the answer, but can we think on what's necessary for the military in Latin America in following your experience to embrace democracy and democratic principles? What do we need to do as civil society, political parties, and in general, not just academics, but we as part of a country? What do we need to do to force them to embrace democratic principles and democracy? Thank you.
Well, I think that the easiest things we can do are related to this small institutional improvements, such as those related to military education and how much we try to have it entangled with civilian education, to have military and civilians going to the same courses and having a socialization that is broader, promoting this technological innovation fora where you have civilian and military, keeping the institutional formats that make sure that there is a control of power, a distribution of power. Also, for instance, there was an important reform in my country that was very controversial among the military. I finished it, it had begun before. The reform of the higher structure of the military towards more integration of different areas and rationalization and giving more power to the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces in detriment of the the different services. There was a fear that the minister would not talk to the heads of the different services. It just takes the practice of relation between the minister and the heads of the different services to show that there was a concern that was just not true. I kept a very close connection, informal contact all the time with all of them, not, of course, stepping on the competences of the head of the armed forces. I think I did. At least I think this is important to avoid concerns, to downplay the concerns, because reforms are always problematic. And so, I don't know, there are many things that can be done, but there are no recipes. No recipes. No one size fits all. Context is everything also here. So I think we can just try to get inspiration from the lessons we learn in other countries. But we cannot import any policies. Or just to give you an example, gender. Training on gender issues is highly unpopular among the military. In my thesis, I realized that a lot of policies, I compared the Netherlands and Portugal, and the Netherlands actually had policies for integration, and Portugal didn't, and they reached the same level in my index to measure integration. What I saw was that a lot of officers I interviewed were reacting against the very policies, women and men alike. And why is that? Because sometimes when you don't do things the right way, policies that are meant to formally integrate can be countervailing forces, can work against integration. If you do training that imports courses and curricula from other organizations without including the reference to the operational context of military professionalism, so that people understand why it is important in their work to understand that gender is an important dimension of conflicts, to understand that when in Sierra Leone in 2002 there was demobilization and disarmament and reintegration of combatants, they left the women out because they were blind to gender dimension. Those same women started a lot of fights later on, and they went to neighbor countries and integrated military forces there. To understand that allowing prejudice is against cohesion. You need cohesion in military forces. So when you train these people, you need to tell them why gender is important. It's not only because, of course, it's a political objective. The armed forces in a democratic polity are defending not only our territory or population, they are defending the values of, I think this democratic culture is there in my country, but we can lose it. But they are defending these same values. So it's important that they are aware of their mission and that they need, for successful mission, effective mission, cohesive forces, allowing prejudice, discrimination, be it gender or any other difference, is really something that no military leaders should want. So we need to understand it's not only about what and why, it's about how we do things, how we translate into practice, how we implement the policies, and we have to think about that while we plan our missions, while we think of the policies, and not at the end. So that would be my answer.
I think we have time for one last question. Guillermo.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. And you leave us with many questions. I suppose all of us were going to go back home and really look carefully into the Portuguese experience. But let me ask you a question. To what extent you think the Portuguese transitional justice process may have influenced what the military became? It takes a certain type of military to open and to accept some form of transitional justice, but transitional justice processes also provide mechanisms of self-restraint. I understand it wasn't as powerful as, say, the Argentinian and other subsequent transitional justice processes, but as you said, it's the founding democracy of the third wave, one that, unlike Spain, had some form of transitional justice. So I would love to hear your views about how those type of mechanisms, which tend to be more portable to other parts of the world, actually may shape or not the type of institutions that the militaries become.
I would love to, except for the fact that we didn't have anything like in these other countries of transitional justice. It's been taboo. Basically, we were talking at lunch about this. So it's been very limited. It's not even my focus, but I do think that we will probably start talking about this now that we also touched upon the topic of restitution. So this will probably be a big issue. It is a very, very important issue, but it has not been tackled. It's not been addressed in Portuguese politics as it should, I think. So please don't think that Portugal is a paradise. It's not. We have these problems, these emerging problems. I just wanted to focus on good things that we can build on, because we are at a moment where I believe maybe like Thomas Kuhn described in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, these moments of change are the moments of uncertainty, of chaos, all that you described this morning. We are witnessing. We are in the middle of big changes, but we are witnessing all these narratives that are, against each other. But we are those who need to create the new narratives. No fact whatsoever will destroy a theory. Only another theory. While another theory does not emerge, there is another or a reviewed version of the democracy theory that is approved more generally, we will be in the middle of a big confusion where the work of researchers, the work of those who think about democracy is vital, I think. What may come out of the discussions and the projects that are being led is an important part. It's a big contribution to what the world will be, the world that we are seeing right now in a big mess. So thank you for your work, and thank you for having me.